This video is an excerpt from my Skillshare class on cell sheet templates. Stay tuned to find out how to get this free template to help you create your own cell sheets exclusively in Procreate. So what even is a cell sheet? Think of a cell sheet as a resume for each piece of art you make. It's a one-page information sheet all about your design that can tell a potential client all they need to know at a glance. It should be a standalone document that needs no further introduction or cover email to go with it. This part is key. And I'm not saying don't write cover emails when you send artwork out to clients. That would be a bit weird, not to mention rude and awkward. But if your cell sheet gets separated from the original email and maybe forwarded on to someone else in the company, or the cell sheet gets saved but then the email is deleted, if there was some vital piece of information that was only on the email and not on the cell sheet itself, like the SKU for the artwork, or worst of all, your name and contact details, how are they ever going to be able to email you back and tell you they love it? So I'll say that again. A cell sheet is a one-page, standalone document that can tell a client all they need to know at a glance. This is my master cell sheet document. I've got each different use case in its own folder, so if I have a single pattern, I'll use this folder here to apply it. If I have a placement illustration, I can turn off the pattern group and turn this one on instead. If I have a collection, I have a folder for that here. And if I have a pattern and matching illustration, I can use this group. So as you can see, this is a real one-size-fits-all document. You don't need to have lots of separate files dotted all over the place, and once this is set up, you can use it over and over again. There's a lot of information here though, so let's have a look at what you actually need to include on a cell sheet. The basic information that needs to be on your cell sheet is a good quality version of the artwork. This doesn't necessarily mean high-res 300 dpi, unless of course you're printing your cell sheet. What I mean is that you don't want it to be so low in resolution or so small on the page that a buyer can barely see it or appreciate it. It needs to be high enough resolution that your art looks good, but not so high that someone can pirate it if you're posting it online. This is especially relevant if you plan to have an open access portfolio on your website. You can always create it in high resolution, so you've got the option of printing and then export at a lower resolution for sharing online, which I will show you how to do later. You also need to have the name and/or SKU for your artwork. An SKU number is an absolute essential in my opinion. You can have several designs all called something fairly similar, like, I don't know, pretty blue floral, but as long as they each have a unique SKU, then there isn't going to be any confusion over which design you or your client is referring to. It also makes it super quick and easy to locate the files on your hard drive if you include the SKU in the file name. You don't have to overcomplicate SKU allocation. I use my initials, RF, then the year I made the design in, and then I just begin at 001 for the first design I make that year, and then 002 for the second, and so on. If you have two designs that are technically the same one, like this pattern and the print I made by redrawing a motif, then I would add an A, B or C to that so that I can tell them apart but keep them tagged under the same main design. A little side lesson here now. The reason I don't class them as two separate designs is that if I were to license this one to a client at any level of exclusivity, I wouldn't be able to license this one to somebody else because it's a copy of this design. When you're licensing your work, it's not just other people copying your artwork that's copyright infringement. You can actually get into trouble for copying your own designs too. So that's why I would count these two as the same design and therefore give them the same SKU. And then the A, B helps me differentiate between them. You can also use this if you have the same design in different colorways, for example. I'm the first to admit that thinking up names for my art is hard, but even I can normally manage to think of something vaguely creative sounding for the name, so I will include that here as well. Your name and contact details. This is arguably the second most important detail to go on a cell sheet, but in terms of flow, it feels like it should be more part of the footer text than the headline. Either way, it's vital not to leave it off. As I mentioned earlier, your cell sheets will often get detached from the original email, cover letter or business card you sent or handed them out with. If you haven't included your name and contact details on that sheet, nobody's going to be able to email you and ask to license it. I would say bare minimum you want to have your name and email address on there. You could also put your phone number on there if that feels relevant for you. So those things are the bare minimum that should be on there. As you can see, it's a nice small list, so if all this is new to you and you're already feeling overwhelmed, you can just go with those few details and you've already got yourselves a professional cell sheet ready to use. On the other hand, there might be a few other things you want to include, such as the artwork size. You can leave this off if you want to, but I've learned from experience that it makes things easier further down the line if you've told a client in advance what size the artwork is. It avoids problems like them assuming a pattern or illustration is in a larger scale than it actually is. For example, if they need to know if that motif is going to fit their duvet cover, so if it's only 6 inches square, you might as well state it up front. None of this forms a legal contract or anything scary like that. It's just for clients to see at a glance whether your art is going to fit on the product they want to use it on. If you have like a weird random size design, just round it down to the nearest whole inch or centimetre to keep it simple. However, if you feel like having the size on there is going to overcomplicate things or slow it down for you, then feel free to leave that off. Optional item number 2 is a description of the design. Some artists like to add some kind of introduction or evocative words to describe their art. I love writing informational copy, but I absolutely hate creative writing. Even thinking up like nice sounding names for my artwork is hard enough. So considering this art description is optional, of course I'm going to leave it out. However, for you, this might be a step in the process that you absolutely love. Maybe you even start your designs this way and come up with this beautiful description of what feelings your artwork will evoke before you even pick up a pencil to draw. And if that's you, then absolutely include it here. This is how you take these templates and make them your own. Optional item number 3 is a colour palette. This again is an optional one. A creative director can see from your art what colours are in it, so there's certainly no need to list them separately. However, I'll tell you why I do include it, and then you can decide for yourself whether you want it or not. So, creative writing isn't my thing, but colour palettes are. I just love seeing a pretty row of colours lined up at the top of my cell sheet, and I also find it useful as a resource for me to look back on and reuse colour palettes from previous designs. It only takes a couple of seconds extra work with the eyedropper tool, so it's not even really a big time trade-off. Most of all though, I personally think that it elevates the overall style and aesthetic of the cell sheet. Basically, it just sparks joy for me. So if you want to include this, then feel free, but if you feel like it's a waste of time, then feel free to cut the fluff. Websites and socials. These definitely aren't necessary, but if you feel like it might be beneficial for someone to check out your online presence and get a feel for who you are, then you might want to include either one of these. I'd say having both is possibly overkill, so just stick to one or the other. Your logo. If you have a logo, then feel free to include it, but if you don't have a logo or brand name figured out yet, don't let that stop you from getting started on your cell sheets and building out your portfolio. A typed name is just fine, and in fact, that's what I use on mine. A copyright statement. I'm including this in the optional section because it should go without saying that the art in your cell sheet is yours and not for anyone to use unless they have your permission. However, the reality is that it sadly doesn't go without saying, so it's best to include this just so no one can turn around and say they weren't told. All rights reserved just means that nobody may use your artwork unless they obtain your permission. Mockups. These can look nice and help a buyer to visualise your art on a product, but they definitely aren't essential. If you're just getting started, you might not actually have any mockups to use or even know how to use one yet. I don't want you to feel like this is something that means you can't get started making cell sheets today. I don't use them in mine. Just like with the colour palettes, where I said a creative director doesn't really need you to spell out the colours for them when they're right there in the design, I also kind of feel like someone who buys art for their job already has a pretty good eye for knowing what sort of art will look good on their products. However, unlike the colour palette, which only takes a few seconds, adding a mock-up can take significantly longer. First of all, you've got to choose the right mock-up for the product. It's not just a case of putting one mock-up in your cell sheet template and then using it on every design you create. Then you'd need to adjust the scale, position, etc., and it can make the whole process of even making a cell sheet feel too much to get started with. Remember, this is all about creating a workflow that allows you to quickly and seamlessly create a cell sheet as part of your overall design process. I don't want this to feel like a bigger task than it needs to be when you're just getting started. As always though, if you love mockups and this isn't going to become like a paralysed by choice stage for you, then by all means include them if you want to. Okay, so now we know what a cell sheet is. Next, we'll look at how and where you can use your cell sheets. I first started creating cell sheets when I decided it was time to start organising my growing collection of work into a portfolio. Before 2020 and all the life changes it brought, I was actually a wedding calligrapher and surface pattern design was just a hobby and a tiny side hustle for me. However, when weddings came to a halt overnight, I decided to use the time off to throw everything I had into making my dream of living off my surface pattern designs a reality. The very first thing I knew I needed to do was get my artwork organised into a portfolio and ready to show off to the world. I already knew that cell sheets were what I needed to get my art onto if I was going to be sending it out to clients, and so I decided to build a portfolio website where the cell sheets could look pretty enough to be how I also displayed my artwork on it. As a quick side note, I'm already working on a follow-up class for this one to show you how to build a simple portfolio website to show off your sell sheets, so stay tuned for that. So as for the how and where to use a sell sheet, my answer is everywhere. I wanted to build one template that I could use on my portfolio website, create PDFs with to pitch to clients, and print if I wanted to put together a physical document to snail mail or handout, and even sharing on social media. There's no reason you can't share your sell sheets on Instagram as long as you remember to remove personal details like email address or phone number if you don't want to get spammed by companies promising to grow your Instagram by however many followers. Seriously. Although I go on to use Photoshop for making the sell sheet template in the class, I mentioned that you can just as easily use other software like Illustrator or Affinity if that's something you're more familiar with. The thing is though, I know that a lot of you work exclusively in Procreate, and while it's not impossible to put a template like that together in Procreate, it would be very tricky to get everything precisely laid out and aligned, simply because that's not really what Procreate is designed for. It would just be too fiddly. However, I didn't want my Procreate friends to miss out on all the fun, so I've put a template together in Photoshop and then exported it layer by layer into Procreate, where I've adapted it and created a multi-page sell sheet template document for you to use in Procreate. You can download yours for free either from my Pattern Makers Toolkit, previously my freebie library, or if you're not a member yet, you can join for free and it will be included in your welcome email. It's kind of like a Patreon group, except better because it's all free. You get access to the Pattern Makers Toolkit, which is the resource library where I keep all my free templates, palettes and brushes. Every month you'll get a new freebie delivered straight into your inbox, along with early access links to some of my YouTube tutorials and drawing challenge prompts. You'll also get 10% off everything in my Etsy store. I only ever send out one email a month because, well, one is quite enough and none of us like being bombarded with daily emails, do we? That's all from me this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more new videos like this every week. Have fun, stay creative, and I will see you soon.